Armello Adventures, The King, Part 1. Words by Alex Kain. Story by Trent Custers and Alex Kain. Where did you say he came from? The light in the farmhouse was dim. A scant few candles flickered as their wicks sat low amongst the mounds of wax. Night had fallen only minutes before, but heavy clouds held back the moon and blanketed hill and dale in thick darkness. The squirrel farmer and her hired hands gathered outside the small, tilted doorway leading into the back room. There, lying in the bed just beyond the threshold, was the strangest creature any of them had ever seen. It looked like a cat, similar eyes, pointed ears and face, but was at least 4 times the size. Where'd he come from? The farmer repeated the question. One of the hired hands, a badger named Gap, pointed to the window across the room. Found him in the woods just yon, Mrs. Isabella. Past the winter wheat, was lying there, dead to the world. Who do you think he is? Isabella crossed her arms, feeling more than a bit uncomfortable having such a massive, menacing-looking creature in her home. He's dressed like I don't know. Looks like one of them rich folk from Brimwatch. The other farmhand, a raccoon named Pim, squinted in the dim light. All in purples and gold trim, probably worth a scudo or 2. Well, he ain't poor wherever he's from, Gap said. He turned back into the main room of the farmhouse, where a tightly wrapped roll of heavy canvas lay atop the sturdy kitchen table nearby. It was marked in strange lettering, though its meaning was impossible to discern. This was right next to him in the woods, some kind of travelling bindle. He pushed the rolled-up canvas, unfurling it over the table before them. Its contents, a thick binding of oblong rectangular cards, brushes and ink bottles slid neatly into the canvas straps affixed to the interior of the roll, and a flat sheet of blank over-large parchment. Artist's supplies looks like custom-made. Could be worth something. Hold up a moment. Isabella leaned in, looking at the cards. They were decorated with vivid artwork, but something was strange about them. You see this? She reached out and pulled one of the cards from the deck. It was a ghastly scene, an army of withered creatures standing about in a fallow field, the sky covered in darkness. The lands were plague-ravaged, destitute, and the artwork was moving. What kind of sorcery is that? Pim shrank back in terror. True enough, the cards seemed to possess some curious form of enchantment. The scene emblazoned on the card shifted and moved, as if the beasts shown therein were actually there, waiting, watching. And that symbol in the corner, Gap pointed. I've seen that before. True enough, nestled in the corner of the card was a symbol familiar to all 3 of them. A coiled worm, black as tar. The age-old symbol of the vile rot. Isabella threw the card back on the pile and hastily rolled the canvas tight. That's enough excitement for tonight, I think. What's about him? Pim nodded to the other room. We ain't leaving you alone with that thing. I'll be fine, Isabella said. You and Gap go and get some sleep. We've got work to do in the morning, same as always. The farmhands traded a nervous glance, but knew better than to argue with their employer. They lit a lantern and ventured outside through the fields to where their homes lay beyond. Isabella watched as the glow from their lantern slowly disappeared into the darkness. Soon, all was quiet. The creature in the back room started to stir. The squirrel returned to the bedroom doorway, arms crossed pensively. The cat, or whatever it was, turned and rolled about restlessly on the bed. "What are you dreaming about, I wonder?" Isabella sighed and turned back to the table, pulling out one of the rickety wooden chairs. She yawned, setting an arm on the table and her head on top of it. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. The next morning, Isabella awoke with a start. The stranger wasn't in his bed. He was standing at the table across from her. The canvas roll was opened, and he was checking the contents carefully. Isabella jumped in her chair, gasping loudly. The stranger winced apologetically, opening his mouth to speak. He said something to her then, but in a language as foreign as the lettering on his canvas folio. It flowed forth in a melodic cascade of deep but delicate intonation, as if a feline purr had been given structure and form. "I don't understand what you're saying," Isabella said. "Do you understand me?" The stranger reared back a bit, clearly surprised. He said something else now, leaning in almost pleadingly. He seemed to be fumbling for words across a couple of different languages now, though none of them were familiar to the squirrel. Isabella sighed. "All right, this isn't working." She pointed to herself. "Isabella." She gestured to the stranger, prompting a response. He took in a long breath. "Tau." "Tau," Isabella repeated. "Please calm down." Isabella stood slowly, reaching her arms out and placing them comfortingly atop Tau's massive paws flat against the table. He looked around the room, seemingly taking it all in for the very first time. Every item in the room was regarded with a kind of exotic curiosity. Then, with a start, he noticed the window. Outside, a palisade of verdant pinewood stood tall against the distant blue mountains, piercing the sky like shards of shattered glass. Both trees and mountains appeared foreign to Tau. He bolted from the kitchen, out the door, and right into the surprised farmhands. "Wild's warning!" Gap exclaimed, stumbling backward into Pym. The two cowered in the shadow of the massive feline, but Tau paid them no heed. He ran past them, looking at the fields, the trees, the mountains. He started speaking again, quickly, close to panic. "Tau!" Isabella ran outside, stopping when she noticed the farmhands before her. "Tau?" Pym glanced at the stranger. "That his name? What language is he speaking?" "I never heard it afore," Gap said. "Tau's a strange name, innit?" Isabella rolled her eyes and waved the two farmhands off. "Enough of that now. He still needs to rest, and you still need to finish sowing the fields." Gap and Pym looked at Tau once more. He was finally starting to come to his senses. "Sure everything's all right?" Pym asked. "Dandy." Isabella walked over to Tau and put a paw on his arm. Hey. She leaned forward, drawing his attention. He turned, and she nodded towards the farmhouse. "Follow me. I want to show you something." Tau nodded in response and followed her into the farmhouse kitchen once again. Isabella pointed to a chair at the table. "Sit." "Sit." Tau tried the word on for size, but it sounded very strange coming from his mouth. Still, he knew what she meant, and sat in one of the old wooden chairs, his bulk straining the wood. Isabella rummaged around a few wooden chests, piles of linen and burlaps scattering about, until finally she found what it was she was after, a rolled-up piece of cloth, held with twine. She unfurled it and held it flat against the table. It was a map of Armello and its clan territories: wolf, rat, bear, and rabbit. At the very centre, where the territories converged, a large circle and the word Brimwatch dominated. "Where are you from?" Isabella asked. Tao stared blankly at her. "Me." She gestured to herself, then to the floor. "Here." She pointed at a small dot on the map, where the words Bellhaven Farm were written. "You?" She gestured to Tao, but he wasn't looking at the farm. He was looking at the larger map. The edges, the features, none of it was familiar. He looked despondent for a moment, and then an idea struck him. He flipped the map upside down to its blank side, then pushed open his canvas roll nearby, pulling out a piece of charcoal wrapped in cloth. With the skill of a master artisan, Tao drew a new map on the back of Isabella's own, this one completely different from Armello. Tao marked areas with curious script, the same adorning the outside of the canvas wrapping, but none of these landmarks correlated with any Isabella knew of. She could make out symbols for rivers, mountains, cities, but to her, they were simply lines on parchment. "Yeah." Isabella sat down and sighed deeply, shaking her head much to Tao's disappointment. "If that's where you're from, then you aren't from anywhere near here." They both sat in silence for several moments, before Isabella finally nodded towards Tao's canvas roll. "What is that?" She made an exaggerated shrug to help visualize the question, and Tao seemed to understand. He slid it before him and removed the deck of cards from within. He said something in his native tongue, but Isabella held up a paw, stopping him mid-sentence. "Do you know what this means?" She pointed a finger at the rot symbol emblazoned on the topmost card. Tao looked at her gravely. "Rot." Isabella nodded. "Why is it here?" Tao said nothing, merely looking down at the card in what the squirrel perceived was shame. He put the cards back in the canvas and rolled it up. Isabella sighed, knowing she'd never get an answer out of him with their language barrier. This poor beast couldn't speak a word in their tongue, had no home, and probably didn't know a single soul anywhere in the territories. She would simply have to teach him the language to learn more. And if he was to stay on the farm, that meant he would need to pitch in and help tend to the land. So it was that Tao came to Armello. As the months passed, Tao came to learn of the land he found himself in. He was no longer a stranger, but a contributing member of the Bellhaven farm. Gone were his royal purples and gold exchanged for a simple cloth tunic, more befitting his new station in Armello. After a hard day's work in the fields alongside Isabella, Gap, and Pym, they would convene in the farmhouse for a shared dinner and hearty conversation. It only took Tao a few weeks to pick up the basics of their language, but it took the rest of fall and all of winter before Tao had full grasp of it. They learned scant few things about Tao across the months. Perhaps the largest revelation was that Tao was a lion, not just a really big cat. Not that it mattered. There were no other lions in Armello. Other secrets, like where he came from, what was in the canvas roll he carried, and how exactly he'd wound up in the woods that afternoon so long ago, were things he kept to himself. It was a cool evening in early summer when Isabella finally decided it was time to learn more about her new hired hand. Their dinner, a hearty potato and turnip soup spiced with garlic and served alongside of freshly baked rye, had just been finished, and pots and pans scrubbed clean. Gap and Pym bid good night and returned to their dwelling across the fields. Tao's makeshift hut sat adjacent to the main farmhouse, so he tarried in the kitchen as Isabella slid the clean stew pot against the hearth. When he noticed the squirrel's repeated glancing across the room, he cleared his throat. "You've something on your mind." His speech, while still sporting a heavy accent from wherever it was he'd come from, was now quite understandable. Or do I presume too much? I'm just thinking. Isabella idled near the hearth. You've come a long way here. Helped the farm. Helped me. Well, you helped me, Tao said. It would have seemed inappropriate to offer anything but my full effort. Oh, would it have? The squirrel couldn't help but laugh. The rough farmer's life had not yet robbed Tao of his impeccable manners. You still speak like royalty, she said. Tao went quiet. Isabella considered her words very carefully, knowing that this could be difficult. You are royalty, right? I was. The days were longer, and it was still light enough to see the distant blue mountains when he looked out the window. But not anymore. What happened? Tao appeared lost in thought for a moment before turning back to Isabella. My brother. Isoba. He was king of our land. He ventured to the front door and stood in the threshold, staring out at the fields of now fully grown winter wheat. He was betrayed. We all were. By whom? Isabella asked. It's none of your... He stopped, noticing Isabella's surprised expression. Wincing a bit, he carried on as if nothing happened. It was our court mage, he said. He led a coup against Isoba. When I tried to stay and fight, my brother had me stripped of my royal heritage. Isabella looked horrified. What? Why would he do such a thing? Royal guards cannot defy royalty, Tao said. I wanted to stay and fight, and they couldn't do anything to stop me. By stripping me of my birthright, the guards were able to drag me from the castle to the borders of our lands. You had no say. My feet touched the ground but a few times along the way, Tao said, hints of anger beginning to creep into his words. I loved my brother. I did. But when he exiled me, he doomed the kingdom of our family ruled for generations. I tried to explain what would happen, but the royal guards had their orders, and I no command over them. He shut his eyes, dim candlelight glinting off unformed tears. They travelled with me for days, weeks, maybe months. I'm not certain. We walked beyond civilization, beyond the threshold of living creatures. His gaze drifted earthward. They all perished, one by one. I alone was left to face death itself at the edge of the world. Isabella said nothing, unsure of what exactly Tao meant. He exited the doorway and disappeared for several moments. It was only when the squirrel heard the dull thud of a wooden door that she realized he had returned to his hut. He entered the farmhouse once again, this time carrying the tightly wrapped canvas that he had brought with him from his homeland. It was only through magic that I escaped the encounter, though not in the manner I anticipated. Magic? Isabella tilted her head. Like those cards of yours. Tao hesitated, then nodded, setting the canvas roll down on the table. Yes, the cards are unique in that regard. They are creatures, spells, promises, and places that I hold as personal marks. When death was inevitable, I wished to return home one last time. He pushed open the canvas, pulling out a card from the bottom of the deck. On the front, a stylized lion, likely meant to be Tao, was surrounded by tendrils of darkness, A pin of light grew on his feet, and the lion disappeared as the darkness enveloped the card's frontage. Then the lion reappeared, the scene playing out over and over again. "It should have sent me home," Tao continued. "But I don't know why, but it sent me here." He gazed at the card in his paws, squinting as if searching for some detail he'd missed. "I've tried using it again, you know, but it always sends me back to that spot in the woods." Silence once more. Finally, Isabella stood and went to Tao. "Then this is your home now?" Tao took a sharp inward breath, voice cracking. "And you've truly made it feel like one. That I feel my labours are hardly enough to repay you for such kindness." "Surely you're joking." Isabella offered a smile. "You do more work than Gap and Pym combined. Because of you, we were able to plant that extra crop of barley in the next field over." She looked over the farm, the sun finally beginning to set behind them. "The Rat Clan will expect their share soon enough." "Share of what?" Tao looked confused. "They don't own this farm. You do." "I'd like to think that," the squirrel said. "But the Rat Clan owns the land it's built on." "What do they offer in return for this tax?" Tao asked, hints of agitation in his voice. "Do they protect you from harassment? Bandits? Anything at all?" Isabella rolled her eyes. "Come, Tao, surely you know." "Know what?" he pressed. "I was a prince, not a thug. Our citizens received protection. Warriors were sent out to hunt thieves and brigands. Do these rats offer you anything in return for your hard-earned crops?" "They leave us alone," Isabella said, her voice cutting hard against Tao's idealistic tone. "That's all we can ask for. That is all we can hope for." She gestured out into the dense fields. "We start harvesting the winter wheat tomorrow. Some of that will be set aside and I'll take it to Brimwatch." "Brimwatch," Tao said. "A town." "A city," Isabella corrected. "Used to be a small trading post long time ago. It's right near the centre of Armello, so it's made life easier for everyone." "Who controls it?" Tao asked. "The Rat Clan?" "Nobody," Isabella said. "Well, no. Everybody, actually. It's divided into 4 quarters, one for each of the clans. They run them like they run their own territories." "Perhaps I should travel with you." Tao leaned in. "If I speak with these rats, perhaps they could learn a thing or two." Isabella rapidly shook her head. "Oh, no, Tao. That would not be wise. Honestly, I worry what would happen if the Rat Clan found out about you." "Me?" Tao shrugged. "Why is that?" "The Rat Clan likes power." The squirrel turned back into the kitchen. "And well, there's nothing like you in the territories." She leaned back against the far wall, arms crossed. "If they found out about you, I can almost guarantee that they'd take you away from the farm and use you to, I don't know, enforce whatever it is they enforce." "They would find such an act both difficult and unrewarding," Tao said defiantly. "Even so," Isabella said, "this is how it's been done for generations." She approached Tao and put a paw on his arm. "Please don't let it trouble you." Tao was silent for a long time, but appeared to drop the issue. "Very well then. I shall retire. We've early work tomorrow." When he moved to claim the canvas wrapping from the table, he stopped. His eyes shifted upwards and he saw the squirrel was looking idly at the canvas between his paws. Go ahead. Ask me. Isabella nodded. That first day, when you showed me that card in your collection. Tao nodded. What are you doing with such ghastly things in your possession? The lion glanced at the canvas folio for a moment, then proceeded to roll it up. The cards I possess represent many things, Isabella, both good and bad. I'm not proud that I have them, but they are relics of my homeland, relics I cannot so easily dismiss. The squirrel scrutinized his face. You keep these foul things even when they are so clearly associated with the rot. I must, he said. The cards cannot be destroyed, lest the magic in them be released. So I carry them for safekeeping. They are my burden to bear, Isabella, mine alone. I see. I think. Isabella looked concerned. I just wish you didn't have them, is all. Tao lifted the canvas roll and offered a deep, troubled sigh. I, as well. This is far more than we agreed. The voice, high-pitched, strained, like claws sliding along the strings of a broken lute, was that of all Rat Clan authority in the city of Brimwatch. The spymaster, Valentin, dressed in a simple silken black tunic, sat in an overlarge wooden throne in the musty main room of the Rats' clan hall. Threadbare red carpet accented the otherwise drab browns and blacks of mouldy, rotten wood that held most of the Rat Clan quarter together. Isabella tried to keep to the carpet and stonework as much as she could. Splinters, fungus, and other festering things held court all around her. She tried to look as calm and collected as possible, even with Valentin pressing her for details. We had a good harvest this season, Isabella finally responded. You always have good harvests, Valentin said. You think we haven't seen it with our own eyes? Isabella was hardly surprised. The Rat Clan was not quick to trust by nature, and even after several generations of her family working in their shadow, they continued to treat them like potential thieves. Because in the Rat Clan, everybody was. What I meant to say, Isabella tried not to sound flustered, is that because of our continual good harvests, I've been able to bring on extra help. I don't believe that is what you meant to say at all, Valentin said. He cracked a grin, yellow teeth fitting right into the decay of the clan hall. But it makes sense, fragment of sense, except... Except what, my lord? Valentin chuckled at the strained my lord. Except this is the work of 3 or 4 hired hands beyond those 2 louts you've got working for you now. He leaned forward menacingly. You wouldn't be able to do that without a fair pile of coin in your paws. Are you holding out on us? Isabella felt the fur on her neck stand on end. She sensed some of the Rat Clan guards moving in closer around her. You what? Valentin asked, his smirk widening with perverse glee. I have but one new hand, though he is strong in ways Gap and Pym are not. The rat laughed. I have little difficulty imagining that. Very well, tell me of this new hired hand. The squirrel glanced to either side. The guards stared intently, unmoving. He is a stranger to these lands. I took him in and he's helped me in return. What manner of creature is he to increase your yield so? The spymaster leaned back in his wooden throne, loud creaks and groans reverberating throughout the hall. He's A lion, my lord. Isabella winced the moment she said it. A what? There was a murmur throughout the hall. Are you mocking me? A lion what? Not lying. Lion. She enunciated it as clearly as she could. It's like a cat. A big cat. The rat's murmuring persisted, but Valentin was quiet, pondering to himself. Finally, after many agonizing moments, he threw an over-exaggerated shrug and stood up on the seat of his throne, just reaching Isabella eye level. Miss Isabella, on behalf of the Rat Clan, I thank you for your over-generous payment. However, because this amount is so great, we must verify the remainder of your harvest is adequate for your own needs. He narrowed his eyes, fixing them directly on the squirrel before him. What kind of ruler would I be if I did not look out for my own citizens? I don't understand, Isabella said, confused. We will be joining you back to your farm. The spymaster smiled and hopped off the throne. With a snap of his claws, the guards assembled into a tight formation behind him, blocking Isabella in with them. We are going on a little road trip, you and I, and my guards. I trust you don't mind. The squirrel farmer knew trust had nothing to do with it. Tao was out amongst the remainder of the winter wheat when Isabella's caravan returned 2 days later. As the hot afternoon sun beat down on the open expanse of farmland, he continued setting about bundling sheaves while Gap and Pym picked weeds in the next field over. It was a shout from Isabella that drew his attention. His name. He looked up and waved instinctively, but his paw slowly fell when he saw the contingent of Rat Clan guards surrounding the squirrel. Isabella! He set the sheaves down and hurried over. Ah, so! Valentin's high-pitched voice came from behind one of the guards. The spymaster stepped out and leaned back to meet the lion's curious gaze. This is the new farmhand? A marvelous creature, absolutely fascinating. Tao glanced to Isabella, who shook her head and gestured back to the rat. Clearly, this was somebody of import, considering her attitude and the quartet of soldiers surrounding them. The lion hesitated, then offered a reverent bow. Honored, my lord, he said. Are you now? Valentin crossed his arms, turning to Isabella. You've taught him proper manners, at least. The squirrel cleared her throat. He did not need prompting. Of course. The Rat Clan spymaster was dismissive. No matter, your master said your name was Tao. My master? Tao cast a suspicious glance at Isabella, who looked mortified. He is nobody's master, Isabella quickly corrected. He works for room and board. A slave by any other name? Valentin said. Tao, listen to me. How would you like to come to Brimwatch and work for me? Isabella looked on the verge of a panicked comment, but Tao was quick to interject on her behalf, his voice terse. I am honored by the thought, but my place is here. Valentin's cheerful demeanor disappeared in an instant. It was no mere thought, Tao. He waved a paw at the endless fields around them. You work long days in this terrible sun, earning nothing but meals and a place to lay your head. I can offer you more than that. In Brimwatch, you will have your own home, wealth and power fit for a king. Tao bolted upright for a moment, the rat's words striking him. He sneered. Something set off in his mind. "I've no need of kingly niceties." His voice was low, growling. "Now go. Get out of here before I—" The guards were quick to draw their swords in response, cutting him off. Valentin shrank back a bit in fear, but caught himself, quickly snapping to anger. "Before you what? Who do you think you are?" The rat turned angrily to Isabella. "He'll accept, or the wild as my witness." She held up a halting paw. "No need for unpleasantness," the squirrel sighed, then stepped forward, looking up at Tao. "You need to go with them." "Do I not have a choice?" The lion spat the question out, already knowing the answer. He glowered at the spymaster. "You think I would ever serve you?" "I think," Valentin said, "that I must remove the choice entirely." He nodded to the guards. "We're taking the whole harvest." "What?" Isabella tried to step forward in protest, but the guards held her back. "But how will we—" "Survive?" Valentin shrugged. "Your big friend here will send part of his earnings to you, and you will buy your food." He laughed. "You should be thanking me, Isabella. You'll be able to live in comfort without working the fields." Tao scowled. "So long as I work for you." "Exactly." The spymaster nodded. "You do what I say when I say it. That is all I ask." The lion watched as the guards started fanning out. One of them was advancing on a rather terrified-looking Gap and Pym. This was it. The end of Bellhaven Farm. "Wait!" Tao held up a paw. "I've a better idea." "What's that?" Valentin smirked. "I do believe I've offered you the finest deal available." "I'll go in peace," the lion said, "but I wish to pledge my loyalty to you on parchment." The rat laughed. My, how official." "Isabella." Tao turned to Isabella. "Please go fetch the writing supplies from my hut." She blinked, looking uneasy. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain." Valentin waved a paw and the guards let her go. She returned a few short moments later carrying Tao's canvas-wrapped supplies. Wordlessly, she gave it to Tao and stepped back. Without pause, Tao unfurled it. The deck of enchanted cards was clearly visible. He glanced at Isabella, who was looking at him with dread. Valentin caught this exchange. "What is this?" he demanded. "What's got—" Before he could finish, Tao had pulled a card out of the deck. He let the canvas fall to the ground, its contents scattered across the thick grass. Valentin didn't know what was happening, but he knew it was not what he'd expected. Hey, stop!" But there was nothing the guards could have done. Tao raised the card, and Isabella saw a familiar image on the front. The withered wanderers, the destitution of plague. The air around them grew vile and putrescent. The sky began to darken, the farm suddenly awash in green hue. The guards suddenly began to choke. Valentin screamed in terror, waving his paws around aimlessly, blinded by the darkness. "Stop this!" Isabella rushed forward and grabbed the lion's forearm. "Tao, you'll destroy the farm, you'll destroy everything." The sun reappeared in an instant, and the air was again fresh with the scent of wildflower and barley. The Rat Clan guards coughed and wheezed, collapsed on the ground. Valentin was frozen in place, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Tao flipped the card in his claws, bowing his head to Isabella. "I'm sorry." The squirrel was mortified as well. She had heard of the rot, of powerful magic dredged from the foulest corners of the world. But she had never once believed it to be real, merely the product of fever dreams and nightmares. And yet, right before her, the nightmare had manifested before her very eyes. The lion pulled away from her grip, kneeling down to the fallen canvas. He set the vile card inside, shoved the scattered items within, then rolled it tight. I just didn't want them to. I know, Isabella said. She tried to think of something else to say, but her attention was quickly turned to Valentin. The spy master was still staring at Tao in mortal fear. The lion followed her gaze and sneered at the rat. Consider yourselves lucky, he growled. Miss Isabella has spared you. Thank you. The spy master took a hesitant step backwards. Now, listen well, Tao said, striding over to the cowering rat. He grabbed a pawful of Valentin's silken tunic and lifted him up to eye level. This farm is now off limits. You no longer require tax from Miss Isabella. Your guards will no longer harass Miss Isabella or her farmhands. He leaned in, their eyes only a hair apart. Say you understand. I understand. Tao dropped the spy master unceremoniously to the ground. Valentin scrambled to his feet and scurried off without another word. His guards, now recovered from the episode, stumbled after him into the woods. What was that? Cap walked up to them, Pym cowering behind. Was that the Give us a moment, please. Isabella waved them off. Go. The two farmhands hurried away across the fields. After a moment, Tao and Isabella were alone. You need to go, Tao. The lion's gaze fell to the ground. I know. I appreciate what you did. She put a paw on his arm. I really do. I know, Tao repeated. Thank you. For everything. Isabella wiped away a tear. I just did what any decent creature would do. You are beyond decent, Tao said. You are exceptional. I do not deserve to be in your company after what I've done. Tao. She tried to think of something, anything to say, but couldn't. The lion turned and rolled up canvas under his arm, walked to his hut. He did not fuss or curse. This was a path he knew he had chosen to take the moment he drew the card. As dawn arose the next morning, he was gone. In the many months that Tao had lived on Belhaven Farm, he had never wandered beyond its borders. Now he was alone, carrying only his small folio and the travelling supplies wordlessly offered to him by Isabella the night before he left. He wandered for days, across verdant plains and vile swamps, thick forests and rocky crags. Soon he was beyond the reach of the Rat Clan, a massive stone monolith branded with a Wolf Clan sigil marking the edge of their territory. Unfortunately, as Tao was quick to find out, the border markers meant little in these lands. As he climbed over yet another hill to see yet another endless green field, he noticed 3 caged wagons trundling along the well-worn path to the east. Massive boars and yaks hefted the wagons at the front, while a half-dozen Rat Clan mercenaries held court at the front and back, armed with swords and crossbows. A few ferrets and weasels, all bearing the sigil of the Rat Clan on cheaply made iron armour. Before Tao realised what he was looking at, one of the mercenaries pointed at him from afar. Hey, you there. Not a step, or we'll fill you full of bolts. The crossbows went up in unison. It was then that Tao noticed the cage wagons were filled with living creatures, sad faces pressed against the bars. Slavers. Tao felt his paws curling up into fists. He had no weapons on him, save for his cards, but retrieving them would require movement, something that was unavailable to him with so many crossbows aimed so precisely. A trio of the Rat Clan mercenaries approached, two weasels with crossbows that never faltered from his chest, and their leader, a ferret with a spear. The ferret looked Tao up and down. "What are you supposed to be, eh?" Tao was silent. The wagons had stopped moving, all attention focused on him. "I asked you a question, Cad." The ferret at the fore poked him with the haft of his spear. "Maybe don't speak." One of the weasels shrugged. "That's fine by me," the ferret said. "Overseer at the mine loves it when they don't speak. Makes it easier to keep them in line." He nodded back to the wagons. "All right, Cat, you're coming with us. Bad day for you, great day for us." The ferret held up his spear into the lion's face, reaching out to grab the canvas roll from his paws. Tao glanced at it, then at the two weasels. He grabbed the spear and wrenched it from the ferret's grip without pause, his strength far outmatching the lanky creature. With a deft sweep, he slammed it into the nearest crossbow, sending its bolt flying high over his shoulder. Tao spun to the side, closing the distance with the remaining weasel, grabbing his crossbow with a free paw and sending his elbow into the creature's teeth. The weasel fell to the ground in a heap, and the crossbow bolt fired off into the distance. "Watch it! Watch it!" The ferret was trying to run back to the wagon, but Tao's spear found his legs before he got too far. The mercenary went down, and Tao already moved back to the first weasel, who was frantically trying to reload a bolt into his crossbow. Tao's paw wrapped around the flimsy wooden device, and he crushed it between his claws. The weasel dropped the useless hunk of splintered wood and held up his arms in defeat. A bolt struck the dirt nearby, and Tao was quick to turn his attention to the mercenaries guarding the wagon. He dropped the spear and grabbed the remaining weasel with one paw, hoisting him up by his cheap iron breastplate. Tao strode forward and picked up the fallen ferret with his other paw. He held the two pathetic beasts up before him, a pair of living shields. The mercenaries continued to loose their bows at him in a mad panic, but all it did was remove two of their own from the battle permanently. Tao closed the distance to the wagon in short order. There were 3 mercenaries left. The beasts of burden had, perhaps sensing an opportunity to escape their vile captors, fled into the fields, while the weasels and ferrets were properly distracted. Tao threw one of his now expired shields into the nearest arbalest, slamming them into the side of the wagon. Countless arms snaked out from between the window bars, grabbing the mercenary and pinning them to the wagon, choking the life from him. "He's tearing us apart! Kill him! Kill!" Tao grabbed the pinned arbalest crossbow and fired at the shrieking ferret, silencing him in an instant. Only one left now. The last slaver, a ferret with a wooden spear, shivered and quaked as Tao approached him. He tried to find words, but only managed to stammer incessantly. Tao grabbed the ferret's spear and quickly snapped it in half across his knee, dropping the useless pieces to either side. His paw shot out then. The ferret thought his neck was about to be snapped like a twig, but the paw was open-palmed. The slaver regarded it with a sense of morbid curiosity. "Keys," Tao said. "Oh!" The ferret looked down at his belt, where a ring of burnished keys hung. They jangled harmoniously in his shaking paw when he dislodged them and held them aloft. As Tao snatched the iron ring from the ferret, he wrapped his paw fully around the jailer's forearm. "Many thanks." He pulled the creature in close and slammed his head into the ferret's skull. The ferret collapsed to the ground, as if he'd been poleaxed. Without a moment's hesitation, Tao walked back around to the first of the wagons in the caravan. Countless faces were pressed up against the bars, their expressions a mix between hope and fear. There were only 6 keys on the ring, so it did not take long for Tao to pop open the lock to the first wagon. He threw open the door and stepped back, waving a paw towards him. "Come!" But the captive creatures held within the wagon, shrinking back at their strange saviour. "Right, enough of that," a new voice chimed in from the next wagon over. It was a young rabbit, his face nearly squeezed through the bars of the side window. "Hey, come on, get moving. This lug won't hurt you." He shifted his gaze to Tao. "You won't hurt them, will you?" "Of course not." Tao tried to smile to offer up a calm, collected demeanour. "You're free now. Those beasts can't hurt you any more." A lemur pressed his way forward through the crowd and stepped gingerly out of the wagon, looking up at the lion before him with awe. The others filed out after him, some shying away from the fallen slavers, others kicking them to make sure they were down for good. A few started pulling supplies off the wagon, knowing they were in for a long journey home. Tao walked over to the rabbit's wagon and unlocked it, the crowd emptying out diligently. "Go on, get moving. Out, 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 please, thank you." The rabbit kept at the far end, making sure everyone was out of the wagon. Finally, ensuring everyone was freed, he hopped out past Tao and grabbed the keys out of his paw. "Come on, one more." The rabbit bounded over to the final locked wagon and opened the door. The creatures within murmured with suspicion at their curious saviour, but didn't tarry nearly as long within the wagon with the rabbit opening the door for them. They congregated together in the field, separated family members crying and hugging one another in relief for their good fortune. Tao held back, and the rabbit stepped alongside him. "Mathis Flintrunner, by the way." He raised an open paw skyward to Tao, who clasped it. "Tao." "Tao, eh? Funny name." "Where I come from, Mathis Flintrunner would be a funny name." "I feel we're learning a lot about each other, but..." Mathis gestured ahead. "You've got an admirer." True enough, a bear was approaching them from the crowd of freed slaves. He had black fur and wore a red hooded shawl, and was the first creature Tao had seen in the territories that was as tall as he was. "Forgive my interruption," the bear said. We, he gestured back at the crowd, which quietly observed from afar. "We thank you for what you did." "Of course," Tao said. "Are you fit to travel back to your homes?" The bear nodded. "We will help each other back to Brimwatch. The Bear Clan stands ready to aid those poor souls wherever we can." He bowed. "I am Urash, Stone Speaker of the Bear Clan." "Stone Speaker?" Mathis mused. "You mean one of those loonies who talks to blue eggs?" "Spirit stones," Urash said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "They are attuned directly with the wild. To speak to them is to commune with life itself." "You talk to rocks," Mathis shrugged. "Either way." "Either way," Tao interrupted the rabbit and returned to Urash's bow. "I am Tao, and I hope your journey to Brimwatch is a safe one." Urash couldn't help but smile at the exchange. "Much appreciated. Should your travels take you to Brimwatch, be sure to visit Wild Tree Hall in the Bear Clan Quarter. Such bravery deserves a just reward." Tao nodded. "I shall keep that in mind, friend. Until then." Urash left the two alone and returned to the slaves gathered nearby. They had taken their abductors' food and supplies, and were now more than ready to begin the trek back to Brimwatch. "We're not going with them?" Mathis asked. "We?" Yeah?" The rabbit sounded incredulous. "Listen, I don't know anything about you, other than that you're really big and you're good at killing things. But I'm going to guess you don't know anything about how the clan territories work." "What makes you say that?" "You attacked a rat clan slave caravan." Mathis gestured to the grisly scene around them. "Sort of an unspoken rule. You leave these folks alone." Tao raised an eyebrow. The wolf clan accepts these rat clan incursions. Mathis shrugged. Well, see, the higher-ups don't really know about these things. That's also a sort of unspoken rule. The lion sighed and looked up into the sky. The sun was close to the horizon now. Night was not far off. Seems there are a lot of unspoken rules. Exactly my point, Mathis said. You need someone to keep you out of trouble, and I'm just the rabbit to do it. He puffed his chest. You see, I was a courtier for the elder flint runners in the Sandstone Warren, before that warmongering Gravis Jasperclaw took over the House of Heritage. Tao blinked. I have no idea what you just said. Mathis took a breath and considered his words. In the distance, the slaves led by Urash were growing small across the field. Tell you what, let's put some distance between us and these corpses, then set up camp. I'll give you a primer. On what? The rabbit grinned. Everything. They'd set up camp a good distance away from the caravan, under a large rocky outcropping. Their fire was small but adequately warm as the chill of late summer nights made its presence known. The moment the kindling had caught, Mathis had begun talking, and an hour later, he had not ceased. Bear, wolf, rat, and rabbit, Mathis repeated for what felt like the 10th time. They set up their little fiefdoms in Brimwatch, and the peace has been tenuous at best. I understand that nobody rules Brimwatch, Tao said. That it's a kind of shared responsibility, a shared peace. Mathis sneered a bit, feigning an over-exaggerated gag. Responsibility? Nobody there's responsible. Not for anything good, anyway. As for peace, well, he dragged a toe claw through the dirt and drew a big circle, then drew 2 lines through it in a cross. Borders create conflict, and Brimwatch is surrounded by 4 borders. Where the next line met in the centre, he stomped his foot. And that's not even the worst of it. He looked expectantly at Tao, then to his rucksack. I'm kind of peckish, actually. The lion rolled his eyes, reaching into the haversack and pulling out a wrapped wedge of aged cheese and a spongy rye. He tore both in half and offered the split to Mathis. So, what is the worst of it? Assuming you weren't actually referring to your empty stomach. Mathis shoved the cheese and bread into his mouth simultaneously, preventing any recognizable words from exiting the rabbit's mouth for several long, awkward moments. Tao took the opportunity to get in a few bites of food himself. The worst thing, Mathis finally managed, mouth still half full, cheeks stretched to capacity, is that peace is impossible. Nobody trusts anyone, because every species in Armello is allied to one clan or another. To top it off, none of the local clan leaders want peace. The elders and sages blame a bunch of ancient evil nonsense. They say an ancient vile presence of rot called the Bane of Brimwich drives the clans to endless conflict, but really, it's just the clan leaders not wanting to cede power. What do you mean? Tao swallowed and reached for a nearby flask of water. Who wouldn't desire peace? You are new here. Mathis smirked. Where to start? He waved a paw dramatically. The Wolf Clan, Lady Boreal, alpha of her pack, leader of the Brimwatch Wolves. The rabbit leaned in, the light of the fire casting menacing shadows and shapes over his face. She's a monster. A monster? Mathis nodded. If you're not a wolf in her part of Brimwatch, you'll be harassed by her pack, no questions about it. She likes to arrest members of the other clans on false charges, torture them, and leave them to rot in her dungeons. He raised his paws high. Then she likes to string up the corpses near the clan hall, warning folks never to cross her. Tao squinted in the harsh firelight. Is there no decent wolf among her pack? Her second in command, Captain Rill, her name is, I hear she's actually quite reasonable, but she answers to Lady Boreal. He shivered, and Boreal would sooner cut her own throat than sign some peace accord with other clans. And with control of all the gold veins running under Brimwatch, Boreal holds a lot of power when it comes to trade. Wolf clan marks are valued above the other clan currencies 3-1. Is there nothing Boreal fears? Tau tapped a claw in his knee, deep in thought. The clan Alpha, maybe. Mathis shrugged. Crag Greymane's his name, rules the Wolf clan territory way up north from Spire Stone Bluffs. He's a bit isolationist, though. How so? The wolves don't really see what happens down here is important, the rabbit clarified. That's how Boreal gained so much authority in Armello. Even calls herself an alpha. In the Wolf clan, there's only ever one alpha, but since Crag is too focused on Wolf clan business up north, there's been a kind of split. Interesting, Tau said. He looked pensive, but quickly changed the subject. Right, so, what of the rabbits? You said you were a courtier for the Flint Runners. Were, yes. He held up a piece of grey rock carved into the facsimile of a rabbit. It's the symbol of our house. We carry it with us to remind us of a time when the Flint Runners actually meant something in the rabbit clan. He turned the carved flint over and over in his paws, a wistful sigh escaping him. We're still powerful, but not nearly as powerful as the Jasper Claws. They led a coup in the House of Heritage and took it over for themselves. So now there won't be any peace between them and the other clans. The House of Heritage. The rabbit shrugged and shook his head, like he couldn't imagine a world where the intricacies of the rabbit clan's parliamentary system escaped any creature in Armello. The most powerful rabbit clan families get to pass the laws for their warren. Normally, it's a few different families sharing the responsibility, but the Jasper Claws were able to bribe, cheat, and blackmail the other families. Now, nothing happens there without their say-so. But they can only pass laws for the warren they lead. Tau started. What about other warrens? Is there some kind of, I don't know, an all-encompassing rabbit clan authority? Mathis smiled and nodded. The House Above, it's called. They deal with matters that affect the rabbit clan as a whole. So things like diplomacy between clan leaders, stopping plagues from spreading, clamping down on clan traitors, that sort of thing. The rabbit sighed. The flint carving passed between his paws as he spoke. Rowena Blackspur is what we call the voice of the thousand, represented the whole of the rabbit clan. Should have stepped in long ago to stop the Jasper Claws from taking over, I think. Why hasn't she? Tau asked. Because the Jasper Claws have power, Mathis said, and even the voice of the thousand is subject to her own people. I understand. I think. Tau mused on that. So, how are the Jasper Claws an obstacle to peace in Brimwatch? He fiddled with a flint carving in his paws. They want to expand the warren, Mathis said. The sandstone warren, that is. Very nice, good craftsmanship. I don't care. Right, the rabbit continued. He fiddled with a flint carving in his paws. The Jasper Claws dig outward, and since the warren is underground, borders are hard to enforce. So they've got enemies in the Wolf clan and Rat clan since they're digging right under their territory. They keep digging and digging and digging. Sooner or later, the wolves or the rats will realize just how far into their territory the warren goes. And, well, he trailed off, grimacing. Tau tossed over the water flask. So, the Jasper Claws control the Sandstone Warren. They won't stop expanding even if it means peace for all, and Rowena Blackspur won't step in to stop them. Precisely, Mathis said. He took a swig of the water and wiped his lips. Not to mention that the Jasper Claws have a treaty with Anira Wildcaller, head of the Bear Clan. Everyone knows the bears have never fought in any wars, but if there is an attack on the Sandstone Warren, the Bear Clan's supposed to step in to make sure things get back to status quo. It's never gotten that far, though. Nobody wants to see their Scarcasters or wild whatevers in a real fight. So it's fear that keeps everyone in check. Tao nodded. Does Inaira hold court in Brimwatch? Mathis shook his head. No, she's over in Wildtree, the Bear Clan capital. Doesn't travel to Brimwatch too much. Thinks she finds the growth and industry there a bit too modern for her tastes. I see. And what about the Rat Clan? Mathis polished off the rest of his dinner, barely chewing it. The Spymaster has his claws in the criminal underbellies of the other clans. He's untouchable. The Spymaster? You mean Valentin? The lion tilted his head a bit. This caught the rabbit by surprise. Yeah. Mathis tossed the water back to Tao. How is it that you know absolutely nothing about Brimwatch except the name of the most powerful, secretive rat in Armello? Tao shrugged. I almost killed him a few weeks ago. Mathis stared blankly at the lion. You almost? The lion nodded. Almost. Well, Mathis matched the nod. That's the same as saying you didn't kill him. He shrugged. So, that's good, he yawned. Maybe let's avoid him for the time being, anyway. So, Valentin is head of the Rat Clan in Brimwatch, then? In Brimwatch, sure, Mathis said, but everyone knows the real power of the Rat Clan comes from the 9 families that rule Rat territory to the east. Every once in a while, they send their ambassador into Brimwatch to see how old Valentin is holding up shop. I hear he gets a good bit nervous. Tao smirked at the thought. They don't trust him. Rats don't trust rats, Mathis said sagely. Anyway, the ambassador's name is, Percy, I think. It changes a lot, though. Could be someone different by now. Mathis yawned again, this time a good deal more forceful. But take my advice, Tao. I'm only telling you so you're informed. Let's do our best to never meet any of these creatures in person. Oh. Tao offered a disarming smile. Of course. While Mathis slept, Tao remained awake, thinking. The stars cast their net of light across the vast night sky. Since arriving in Armello, he had tried to pick out familiar stars or constellations. But even the sky was different than the one he remembered back home. The rabbit was snoring fiercely on the other side of their small campsite. But that wasn't what kept Tao awake. The lion was contemplating everything Mathis had told him. Brimwatch, Lady Boreal, the Jasper Claws, Valentin, the Bear Clan's treaty with the Rabbit Clan. Mathis had, perhaps unknowingly, laid out a rather convincing case. There were obstacles to peace in Armello, personified by but a portful of problems, all of which necessitated their own solutions. These solutions were not unattainable by any means, quite the contrary. As the moon made its way across the night sky, Tao's mind was filled with possibilities, plans, and finally, resolve. He reached over to his art supplies and rolled them open. By the time the sun rose over the distant horizon, Tao had made a decision. Mathis barely had time to rub his eyes of sleep before the lion appeared looming over him. We're going to Brimwatch. We are? Tao held out a paw to help him up. You're taking me to the Bear Clan quarter. I wish to speak with Irash. Mathis considered this, shrugged, then nodded in approval. Yes, fine, good. If you're going to make nice with anyone in Brimwatch, the Bear Clan's as benign as it gets. The rabbits stomped out their campfire, kicking dirt and sand over the top of it. The city's not too far away. Think we could make it by mid-afternoon if we hurry. Then hurry we shall, Tao said. It would be impolite to keep them waiting. To be continued in The King, Part 2.